PDFs I'm showing up.
Will do. Will do. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for accommodating this. I'm sorry for the difficulties.
No worries.
So you got the first slide up there. It says environmental flow analysis for the Marcellus Shale.
I do.
Okay.
And the introduction slide as well.
That's okay. Great. So I'm Todd Balter. I'm a professor at Cornell University, and Brian Buchanan has been a postdoctoral researcher working on this. And so this whole issue of environmental flows is sort of a global issue. You know, there's dams going up all over Vietnam and South America, and so a lot of people are looking at this, and it hasn't escaped North America either. Even as we're trying to remove dams, there's a whole bunch of water withdrawals that have to happen in places where we're doing gas, well, any kind of natural gas or oil extraction using sort of contemporary methods. And so if we go to the next slide, should say Introduction to Marcellus Shale Region. Okay, so the region we're looking at is really interesting because it drains to the Gulf of Mexico and also to the Atlantic seaboard in a couple different places, and it has it's incredibly important as a drinking water supply. It's also really important ecologically because there's, you know, oh, am I still on?
I'm here. I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I am here.
Okay, I'm getting like some other weird stuff happening here. Anyway, I'll keep going. From a biodiversity standpoint, it's also super important. For species, lots of pristine areas. We go to the next, and it covers a huge part of the eastern United States as well. So if we go to the third slide, and I'm sorry these aren't numbered, that to access things like the Marcellus Shale, which is a very shallow or it's not a very deep strata of geology to withdraw natural gas from, they do this horizontal drilling, kind of cool in and of itself, but it requires them to do hydrofracking, which means a lot of water down into this geological strata to kind of open up these cracks. And this is what the main concern is for us, is that they're withdrawing water from the local streams and rivers to pump down into these wells. This is also what geologists call dry strata, so that water mostly stays down there. You don't get very much of it back out. Okay, you can see in this lower left-hand figure here, sort of the density of wells that are being established here. So you can see there's kind of a hot kind of thread right through the middle of the formation. And if you look over here on the bottom right-hand side, you can see that stream. You can see both banks in this photograph, and there's 5 or 6 pretty big hoses withdrawing from here. So there's a potential to withdraw a lot of water from some very small sensitive streams in this area. And if we go to slide 4, which is a map showing just sort of the density of wells, you know, or showing all the places where there are either active wells or potential wells or projected wells, you can see this is kind of a huge swath of activity throughout this region. And so each one of these dots is going to have to withdraw, you know, potentially millions of gallons of water to actually activate that well. So this is what kind of motivates the concern here. And if we go to the next slide now, Matt.
Yep.
So our goals really were to like look and see kind of what were the potential ecological impacts from this activity. This is kind of a basic research question, and then can we actually translate that information into some sort of management guidelines that would allow this, you know, potentially necessary activity to go forward with sort of minimizing the impact, and those are things. So if we go to the 6th slide here, I just want to point out that this is not a local problem, even though we're focusing on the Marcellus. This map is sort of showing overdraft or places where there's potential for withdrawals to have huge impacts in general. And this is primarily looking at groundwater, I mentioned it. But so the Marcellus region stuff is kind of a not huge impact. It's still 0.25% change. It's still pretty big. But the point is just simply that what we're doing here in the Marcellus Shale region has implications all over the United States. Okay, so if we go to the 7th slide now, we should have 3 maps here. And this is just kind of show you, we chose to do a very data-driven approach to this. You know, use whatever data are available out there and draw our conclusions based on empirical evidence rather than trying to do, you know, simulation modeling and stuff. So you can see here, in this region, one of the things, there are a lot of USGS gauges. Okay, and you can see on the left side, this shows you all the gauges that are monitoring stream flows for watersheds where there's been substantial alteration done to the system. The middle one is showing you what we're kind of calling our pristine or natural gauges. So there's about almost 200 of those. And then we had to wade through about 10,000 or over 10,000 sites where there were ecological observations that we could kind of relate our flow alterations to see you know, what were the flow alterations doing to the ecology. So it was a very data-intensive process. We go now to the 8th slide. This will kind of show you what we actually did, to kind of figure out, you know, how would the potential pumping of water out of these streams impact the ecology. And so what we did is we looked at a whole bunch of potential ecological responses based on those 10,000 sites. Over 10,000 sites that we looked at, and we can choose sort of like indices that we would use to measure ecological response. And so over here, Brian's actually listed 6. I think we had more than this, but there was at least 6 different things, like species richness, you know, how many species are present, total abundance, you know, all these different things could be different ways to measure ecological response, and then percent flow alteration. You know, that sounds nice, but what does that actually mean? And we actually, I think we took our marching orders a little bit from the Nature Conservancy. We looked at 18 different flow metrics. So things like minimum summer flow or median February flow, or, you know, all these different ways of trying to figure out how has this particular metric changed as the watershed has been altered and the flow's been altered. And then we, of course, related that back to these ecological metrics. Okay, so you can see that you have 18 flow metrics and at least, you know, 6 or 8 different ecological metrics. So you have a whole bunch of different ways of trying to evaluate this system here. And so what we ultimately wanted to do is go back and say, okay, if we know what this ecological response is going to be to the changes in flow, can we go back then and do some simulation modeling? So this left-hand figure is kind of showing you how we kind of layered in some different things that we knew about where there was likely to be gas well drilling, where different ecological metrics, how they were going to be distributed throughout the region, and how sensitive the bottom sort of like map there, it's buried, is sort of how sensitive those metrics were to changes in flow alterations. We kind of combined those all together with our knowledge then of how changes in flow with influence ecology maps that of sort of what the most sensitive areas were throughout the region.
Matt, you want to advance the slide?
Okay, I wasn't sure if you moved on or not.
Oh, sorry. So what does this mean for water withdrawal? This is what I'm on now. Gotcha. Okay, we're there?
Yep.
Okay. So we kind of take all this information on the left-hand side that we've gotten, we can kind of garner from the web. We got this middle graph is sort of stuff, relationships we developed by looking at the available data, and we can put those things together to come up with maps of sort of sensitivity for any species or ecological metric that we wanted to look at. And so, you know, I think we actually worked all the way through this whole process for maybe a half a dozen or a dozen different ecological metrics or individual species even. And so I'm going to let Brian take it from here and kind of just show you some examples of the types of things we actually found out. So Brian, you want to take over? On slide 10, which has a billion little graphs.
Yes, hello all, this is Brian. Yeah, so we're on to the findings here, and we're not expecting you to digest all of these little graphs. It's more just to show you that we looked at a lot of different combinations of flow alteration versus the ecological response to those alterations. And we don't really have time to go over all of them, of course. So we're just going to be focusing on the two that are kind of highlighted there in those little red boxes. And they deal with species richness. So we'll go ahead on to slide 11. And that should show you a bit more detail about the species richness relationships that we found. And so basically what we're looking at here is how the species richness declines so significantly with reductions in the summer median flow and the annual runoff. And those both are on the x-axis. And so the data points here are sized in proportion to the watershed area to try to see if watershed size was sort of confounding some of our relationships, and we didn't really see that, but we won't get into all that detail here. But as you'll notice, there's a fair amount of scatter in the data. That's fairly typical for flow ecology curves. And to help us evaluate, you know, the sort of pattern.
Matt, you want to advance it down to the two?
Okay, yeah, Brian, if you can just let me know when you're changing slides.
No. Go back up, Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
so we should be on slide 11, which is a zoom in of those two species richness flow ecology curves.
Yep,
and
there.
So hopefully to catch you up here, and you know, as I was saying, there's a bit of scatter in this sort of flow ecology data, which is to be expected, and that's why people typically apply something called quantile regression, and that just allows you to describe how the best possible biological status changes across the varying degrees of flow alteration that we see as we go from, you know, the far left-hand side of the x-axis to the far right-hand side of the x-axis. So for our study, what we did is we chose to look at the 98th quantile, and that will describe our upper bound response. And if we look at the 0% alteration line, which is that blue line in the left graph, we can basically interpret that as saying there's a 90% probability that under 0% or, well, 0 alteration, the best species richness would be around 22 species. But if we see a 35% reduction in the summer flow, which is that red line, which connects with the x-axis at around 35, then our best case scenario is that we'll only have about 16 species. So the basic idea here is that, you know, less summer flow, or, you know, if we're looking at the graph on the right, less annual runoff means significantly fewer fish species. And we found that that general trend applied to a number of ecological metrics, as we saw in the previous slide, and also different flow metrics as well. So we saw these sorts of general wedge-shaped distributions that decline across many flow ecology metrics. Now, in order to be able to use these flow ecology relationships effectively for our purposes in this study, we need to understand what the likely range of flow alterations might be due to withdrawal associated specifically with hydraulic fracturing. And so, you know, we're wondering, are we going to see a flow alteration in sort of this blue shaded region?
Okay, so we're on slide 12 now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, we're on slide 12. Forgetting about that. Sorry, guys. So in order to be able to understand this effectively, like I said, it would be helpful if we could get an idea of what the magnitude of the flow alteration is going to be. And, you know, we're not sure, is it going to fall in the 0 to sort of 10% range, which is, you know, described as blue shaded region, or is it going to be greater and more significant, like as in this sort of yellow shaded region? And so that's where our pumping scenarios kind of came into play. And this slide is to kind of give you an idea of the various combinations of pumping scenarios that we implemented.
Slide 13.
Slide 13. Thank you, Todd.
Pumping scenarios plus flow standards.
Yep. Not used to saying that. Yeah, sorry, guys. We're on slide 13. And so this slide is just to show you, as I said, essentially the the number of different pumping scenarios in combination with different flow standards that we enforce when doing these withdrawal scenarios. And so the table on the left is just showing you a list of our 6 flow standards that we implemented. And we highlighted for you in that red box the T&C flow standards, which are probably the more complex of the bunch because they vary according to seasons. And there's also some withdrawal caps, and those are all a function of exceedance flows, which is these pass-by flows here. If you look, it says Q50, Q70, and those all refer to exceedance probabilities. And so what the graph on the right represents is we have state along the x-axis and we have discharge along y. And so the black line is essentially the natural flow with no withdrawal whatsoever. The red line, which is the lowest, like if you see it, it appears in the bottom right, that essentially represents withdrawal without any sort of pass-by flow standard enforced. And then all the various other colors all represent the different kinds, of pass-by flows that we implemented. And so if we go to slide 14.
Actually, Brian, before you go on,
yeah.
Is this graph on the right showing because you had like low, medium, and high pumping scenarios. Is this a
right.
high pumping scenario?
This is the medium pumping scenario.
Medium, okay.
Yeah. So yes, and it would look different depending on which pumping scenario. We just chose to pick one to show here to translate it, because I think a lot of people are used to seeing hydrographs. That's essentially what this is, just with different levels of flow extraction and flow protection implemented. And so,
we're looking at about another 5 minutes or so before the discussion.
Okay.
If you go to slide 14, we can use our flow ecology relationships, and we can translate the pumping scenarios and the flow standards into sort of ecological ramifications. And that's what we're trying to show here in the series of graphs on the bottom right, where we have pumping rates are increasing. If we're looking at the graph on the right, pumping rates are increasing from left to right. So we've got low intensity increasing to high intensity, and then we've got stream size is increasing from top to bottom. So small headwaters increasing to medium tributaries. And the shaded regions are basically represent these hypothetical biological condition categories. And essentially what that translates to is, as you go from light gray to dark gray, you have more and more ecological degradation. And so these shaded regions were determined using our species versus flow ecology relationship that we showed previously. And so some of the take-home messages from this graph are essentially that, number one, the ecology in small streams is especially visible. And you can see that many of the box blocks there in the top row of that figure are shifted pretty far to the right. They're in the bad dark gray territory, essentially. And a second point is that the T&C guidelines, which are highlighted by these little red boxes, are doing a pretty good job of mitigating pumping impacts. And we had a couple of the other standards that did a fairly good job too, but we found that they were a bit more essentially overly restrictive in terms of allowing a reasonable amount of water for human use. And so the T&C seem to find a better balance between ecological water needs and human water needs. And moving on to slide 15, here we're looking at some of the results of our risk analysis, and essentially what we did here is we incorporated some data from an existing AppLCC funded study looking at gas well development in the Marcellus Shale region and the Appalachian LCC in general. And we incorporated that data here as the probability of gas well development. We combine that with the probability of a particular species presence. So in this case, we're actually looking at a gill. So the probability of the gill net builders. And these guys are essentially species that have similar flow requirements during nest building, spawning, egg, and larval development. And we combine that with the ecological sensitivity to soil alteration to generate this cumulative risk map, which essentially is saying if you're in the red, then it's a high probability that there's going to be nest builders there, there's a high probability of gas well development, and there's a high probability that that particular stream is going to be quite sensitive to soil alteration. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Todd, who will talk to you about the proposal.
Thank you, Brian. And so we could make these types of maps for any kind for multiple guilds or multiple species if we had the resources to do so. And in fact, that kind of segues now. If we go to slide 16, we're thinking about what maybe the next steps are. And having gone through this, we have some ideas of how to improve what we're doing. But primarily, what we'd like to do is we'd like to develop more of these risk maps for different pumping scenarios, different flow regulations, different types of species or guilds that we might be interested in, and then potentially put those out on some sort of online decision support tool. So we go on to slide 17, kind of a little bit of a cartoon of what this kind of thing might look like, some sort of online mapping tool where you might be able to look at different types of data that we've synthesized here. If we look at the top right-hand sort of cartoon of a zoom in the region, or even better, we might be able to select specific stream reaches and maybe suggest what would happen if do sort of what-if scenarios. What if we wanted this much withdrawal under these regulations? What would the ramifications be based on the data we've synthesized so far? And if we go on to slide 18, we can even think bigger than this. You could think about incorporating into a tool like this, real-time data, so that if you're in a particular year where the flows are high or low, the streams might be more or less sensitive, and you could think of this, in much bigger terms, like I say, bringing in real-time data, making it accessible on mobile devices, making it applicable to multiple different users. And so this very noisy cartoon just kind of suggests that there are multiple directions that this can go. And if we go to the last slide, I just kind of want to emphasize that we're sort of a small nugget in a big network of information, of resources, and both coming to us from upstream that we hope we're handing to downstream entities or resources that will actually be able to capitalize on this work. And so with that, I hope we're not too far over. We'll take any questions.